Wasn't the one.
This wasn't the
Sorry,
one.
this was an inside joke. Sorry.
It's coming later.
Okay,
we'll
wait. We'll do it later. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. But we really want to wade into it with humility. And yes, I am. Well, I don't know if it's humble to say I am humble, but I try to be, right? I try to sit with people with humility. And then, what were we going to say?
And playfulness, too. Playfulness.
Yeah, it's good to laugh.
Yep.
Yeah. So kind of want to just throw some stats at you, probably kind of hard to see with the sun, but these just come from a couple of resources we'll kind of reference throughout the book. The first one is a book by Amanda Ripley. It's called High Conflict. And then another is a book called Never Have I Thought of It That Way by Monica Guzman, and we'll reference those later. But kind of the first stat is, by some estimates, 38 million Americans stopped talking to a friend or family member because of the 2016 election. Half of American voters in 2016 said their votes were defensive, based more on who they were voting against versus who they were voting for. And then in a 2021 poll, most Americans thought the biggest threat to our country's way of life was other people in America. And so it's really kind of saturated in our culture and our society, just this defensiveness and conflict and division. It's kind of hard to see, but that is a picture of the La Brea tar pits in California. And one of the books I really like, it's by Amanda Ripley, it's called High Conflict. She uses the La Brea tar pits as an analogy to talk about what it's like when you get enticed into a conflict and we get stuck in it. So she talks about how, the first animal probably just wandered in there and got stuck and couldn't get out. And then all these predators start to come around and they're like, this looks like good food, we want that. And so they go into and they get stuck. And then it just, as they've excavated the tar pit, they've found bones from woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and all of these animals that have predators and I can't think of the word for the ones the prey, thank you, that want to get away, right? And so really just, she really talks about the more that you struggle, the more that you fight in the conflict, the deeper you sink into it, and you lose sight of what it was even about in the first place.
One of the ways we see this clinically is in the last 5 minutes, one person, one partner, one co-parent, one spouse wants to have, I just want to say one more thing. I just want to say one more thing and clarify my position and why he or she is wrong, is what they're saying. That's them being hooked. I can't get myself out of this. It's really important that everybody knows why I believe what I believe, right? That's them getting hooked, and it's keeping them in this cycle. And if you guys are anything like me, you have felt this with other people too, right? Welcome, come on in. We all shared our most embarrassing moment ever. It's kind of an intimate meeting, and now it's your guys' turn. Come on in, welcome. So go ahead.
Yeah, and so, as we kind of wading into this, we really wanted to talk about the challenges that we see in the culture, that we see in families, and we do see this either or, right or wrong kind of thinking, and that really does contribute to polarization and division. We see how technology does. Social media can create an echo chamber of thinking and reinforcing the right, the wrong, the good, evil. We tend to get a feed that reflects our own viewpoint and what we're interested in, and so that can just create an echo chamber. Polarization, it can be apparent in schools, even sports teams, and this can deepen the polarization from within by encircling ourselves with very like-minded people. So we tend to sit in spaces that think and believe similarly as us. And then kind of the cancel culture that can kind of amplify it as well. And so the different streams of media can reinforce separate kind of truths. It's either Fox News or CNN or, those kind of polarized media outlets. And then we also just wanted to just keep talking about how families are impacted by this, just a little more specifically. We see generational divides. We see a reluctancy for people to connect. and kind of a cautiousness about coming together for a gathering, about getting together, kind of cut off from a relationship altogether. And kind of more peripheral connections and not really going in the deep, not really having deep connections about what you value and what you believe and think. And there's just a lack of security and safety in those relationships. Kind of, if I bring up my viewpoint, it creates immediate defensiveness or an attack from my family member or my coworker. And there is this withholding of intimacy, of real connection from one another. And then if there's already a relational injury or hurt, that difference in political view can just blow it up. It can exacerbate the whole thing and cause even deeper relational hurts. So there's just this desire to have connections and an anxiousness about having deeper. And that's really, really what we see the tension in.
Yeah, I wouldn't add anything.
And I love scripture. Just as a person, and I were at a church, so I thought I'd throw it in. But I was reading through Romans, and I was struck when I read this, and I kind of highlighted a couple, but I have the whole passage in there. But 16 and 18 really stuck out to me, of living in harmony with one another, and if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And what a call, and how hard it is to live at peace with everyone we meet. And just found myself like, oh, Lord, how do I do this? How do I actually sit with people and live in peace with them and offer, have connection and harmony?
Do not be conceited, right? When we are certain that our position is right, it's really hard to live this way, right? Do not be conceited. So how do we work to embrace the gray of and the mystery of diverse perspectives?
Mm-hmm. And this is what Matt thought was so funny earlier, the pool of intimacy. And so it's kind of an analogy for, what it can look like when you're at a swimming pool, right? You've got a lifeguard on duty, you've got people swimming in the shallow end and the deep end, and when there's the right kind of environment, people can experience this safely. And so when you take away the safety of some of those things, even like an adult just watching, if a lifeguard isn't on duty, if people don't feel safe to go into the water, they're going to stay on the perimeter, they're going to stay outside of it. And they're not going to feel comfortable jumping in the deep end if they don't have the right floaty on or the right things in place. And so, there's a natural filtering of relationships, and when we share thoughts and feelings and life experience and ideas with one another, and we have to have that safety in place to be able to step into those deeper waters and have intimacy with people.
Is this me?
Mm-hmm.
So anybody familiar with Jonathan Haidt? Anxious Generation was the new book. Yep. So this was a book from about 6-8 years ago, something like that, The Coddling of the American Mind. What Haidt and his colleague are talking about, Lukianoff, are these kind of precepts that they believe are pervasive all over the world, that are making it difficult to be in relationship with each other in the pool of intimacy, right? In a place of walking into differences and feeling like we can create safety and security to be in it together. So they describe the three untruths. The first is the untruth of fragility, that whatever doesn't kill me, or whatever, how does he say it? Whatever doesn't makes, and they turn it around, whatever doesn't kill me makes me weaker, right? So anything that I bump up against, and think about how our culture operates. You can't say anything that makes me uncomfortable, because I'm fragile. I mean, implicit in that is I'm too fragile to consider a perspective that is unlike mine. Right, and so that they describe that as becoming pervasive right about 2015, 2016, and not just in the United States, but these are things that are spreading all over the world too. he describes the untruth of emotional reasoning. If I feel it, it is reality, right? And so it sets us up to be adversaries because your feeling may be really different than my feeling, you know? And so now we have other truths operating in conflict. And then that leads into the last one, the untruth of us versus them. That if you don't see it my way, then you are the enemy, right? And so he says these three principles are contributing to making it difficult for us to spend time in the pool of intimacy. We had a laugh. My colleague uses that terminology, or he coined that terminology recently, and I'm having a hard time with it, as you can see. So I'm trying to stay professional. But these three untruths are pervasive, and they're making it difficult. And so how do we walk in knowing that these might be guiding the way that we're showing up, and have relationship and conversation honoring that you know many of us are living in those places? And how do we invite people to meet in a middle place even when these are operating for us?
So this is this information's from a book I referenced earlier. It's called I Never Thought of It That Way. It's by Monica Guzman, and she talks about 3 patterns of human relating. We get together in groups. It's wired into us. We find people that are like us. There's the othering. We have a natural tendency to separate ourselves from people and ideas that are opposed to us. And then siloing. When we have less contact with the other, we stop colliding with people who think differently than us. And so we can get stuck in the silos. But these also can be good things, right? They're wired into us. It's good to connect with people that are similar. And also, the hope is we get awareness of and learn to recognize when these show up, and we find ways to step out of them when they become divisive.
So again, as Alexis said, we move to where we have like-minded experiences, and in doing so, we can begin to set up some of what she talked about with the othering, right? And if we incorporate some of the principles from Jonathan Haidt, right? If you're not for us, if you're against me, right? We can begin to see that othering happen. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And the sorting as well.
Yep, and the sorting as well. Bonus points for anybody who recognizes that. Lost. Oh. That's right. Those are the others. Yes. That's right. Those are the others, right? They had this fear. You know, they began to understand that there was this other group on the island that they didn't really know. And just what a strange show, right? But anyway, they started to fear these others who actually were just like them, right? They were actually on the same plane, I think, and just began to build community. And so they began to identify the others as adversaries. And then siloing, right? Think about the media that we consume. Think about the conversations that we have. They just reinforce our beliefs, right? And so these are what Guzman is talking about is being mindful that these are normal patterns in relationships and in humanity. And in order to combat some of the divisiveness, we have to be intentional about being aware when these are active in our lives and how they may be influencing us. Me? Mm-hmm. So another book by Jonathan Haidt, Righteous Mind. He's working with this moral foundations theory, which identifies 5 sort of moral principles that he's describing and suggesting are pretty much worldwide. Maybe different kinds of ways of describing them. But he says the 5 are care, fairness or justice, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And so it's fascinating because he goes a little deeper by identifying in terms of kind of political landscape that the care one, the care precept, is elevated by people who lean more to the left politically, right? And the people who tend to lean more to the right don't order them as much. They don't elevate care above the others, right? So now there are some things going on in our politics right now that I think have turned some of these things topsy-turvy. But part of what I think he's suggesting is that our job is to see, can we understand what are the principles at work in helping people inform their belief system, right? And because we will often operate out of whatever our moral framework is and presume that that's the way to think about this. Well, what he's suggesting is people kind of prioritize these in all kinds of different ways, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just a different way of prioritizing what's important.
Yeah, so each person might have different moral leanings, and these can be reinforced by the social networks that we belong, and it can lead to a great polarization unless we're remaining open to hearing others' views and trusting each other with dignity and sitting there with humility. And so I really appreciated this kind of photo that I found online, and he talks about it as moral taste buds, and how like one person might like cilantro and to someone else it tastes like soap, right? And so we have these different preferences that are created through as we live our lives, and kind of looking at the differences in views as, okay, what is this person, how are they ordering these different principles and these values, and it's perhaps just different than mine. They may be weighing care or harm more than how I view it. And so, yeah, just a provocative thought and photo as we kind of move on.
And it's Amanda Ripley, who talks about there are provocateurs who are exploiting our differences here. And so all of us get hooked by provocateurs who are activating us in our preferred and then end up splitting us against people who have different kind of moral foundation, different framework. Right? And so what we're hoping to kind of establish together in the next couple of weeks is how do we walk in and understand that all of us are susceptible to that, and how do we walk in with understanding? What are the taste buds that someone else has that I don't have access to, or aren't as what would be a good word? Aren't as
tasty.
Tasty.
I don't know.
Tasty. Let's go with that. Yeah. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in relationships. One of the things that we do a lot of work with couples and families, and so we see these things show up in couple relationships, family relationships. The Gottmans are kind of relationship gurus, so there's lots of good, they've done a lot of good research on couples and how couples work, and when they don't work, what's happening for them. They talk about these 4 patterns that show up in all relationships. The first 3, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, are very common. The last, contempt, is where relationships really start to break down. And so it's important to be aware of how they're showing up in our relationships with community, right? If I'm going to criticism, I'm going to put someone on the defensive, right? And they may exit or they may counter with more criticism, right? That's how, when we work with couples, that's how we help them sort that out. What's underneath the criticism? And we help sort out hurt and frustration and differences. And if that doesn't get cleaned up, we see people going to a state of contempt, right? Contempt is not you're doing something wrong, you are wrong. There's something wrong with you. And so culturally, that's what we're doing with each other when we can't see the important moral framework that they're using that informs them about, where they want to stand politically or what issues are important to them. If we're not careful and we're not aware, contempt can consume us, right? So, wanted to highlight that. Me? Anxiety fuels conflict. When we're anxious, and we're not taking care of ourselves, we haven't eaten, we haven't slept, and we have strong opinions, we are susceptible to engaging in conflict. So one of the things that we work a lot with families on is creating structure. Alexis was talking about the pool of intimacy, and see, I only laughed a little bit. That's good. So like having lifeguards, right, and rules, right? So anxiety settles down when there's clarity of rules. How are we going to work together? How are we going to manage different perspectives, different opinions? Right? So, think about the holidays and some of the differences. Some of the work might be beforehand to work together to figure out, we've got some pretty different perspectives in this family. How are we going to manage it so we can celebrate and love each other? Come around whatever the event is, birthdays, Thanksgiving, the birth of baby Jesus, whatever it is, right? How can we create some structure, a framework, so this can feel okay? So part of your work, perhaps in this community, is how do we create safety and security, lifeguards, rules, guidelines for how we operate together. Many of you have probably been in a class or a course where an instructor at the beginning set kind of some guidelines for how we're going to operate, and that's gone really well. You've also been in environments where it didn't get set up on the front end and it went really poorly, right? Structure reduces anxiety. How are we doing that, especially if we're in some kind of leadership role in this community or in our communities? And then how are we doing that in our families, where everybody here except this little one is in a leadership role in their family, right? So structure reduces anxiety. How did I do today? Hit the points? Hit it.
I also want to say next week we'll be talking a little bit more about what are actually some practical ground rules that you can set in your families and your relationships to be able to start to build and go in deeper and build more connection. This is you too, but really I really just wanted to highlight just the fear and kind of scarcity mindset that can be behind, that can just be very pervasive in people's views. It's this, I've just noticed just a fear and just kind of that's very pervasive. And then also this can kind of kick in the siloing in the othering. They're really sticking to what they got and they're stuck in this silo and they're othering them because they're really afraid and they're scared of what's going to happen. They feel like they don't have enough resources.
Yeah, it's important to monitor when we're fearful. Is the economy's going to be a train wreck? The country's going to devolve into, a fascist state. I'm not going to have a voice. When fear is operating in me, it has an enormous power, like Alexis said, to drive me. I think there's probably something in the Bible somewhere about fear. Is there something? I mean, fear the Lord, but there's lots of wisdom about trust. Trust God. Let go of fear. Operate with what you have control over to do God's work with what's before you. Right? So be mindful of when is fear showing up, when is anxiety. If I'm checking, polls obsessively, right? That's fear. Is anybody else doing that? That's fear. Am I going to be okay if this person is in charge or that person is in charge? Right? That's fear, and it has a lot of power to drive me to behave in ways just personally, but also interpersonally. Because now it's my job to call people in North Carolina and Georgia and Arizona and all these swing states to say, hey, you have to make sure that so-and-so wins so that I can be okay. right? Instead of engaging in relationship and conversation, the fear drives me.
And so I just want to talk a little bit about conflict, like high conflict versus good conflict. And so this is one of the books I referenced earlier by Amanda Ripley. And some of the struggles we have, that is conflict is a part of relationships. Given some of the dynamics at play, people don't know how to step out of them. And Ripley describes high conflict as a type of conflict that's characterized by entrenched, polarized positions where the parties involved become deeply enmeshed in the struggle itself. Often involves personal attacks, a sense of moral righteousness, and a focus on defeating the opponent rather than resolving the underlying issue. And a high conflict tends to escalate and can become self-perpetuating, and the conflict becomes the primary focus rather than the original problem or potential solutions. In contrast, good conflict is productive and constructive. It involves disagreements and differing opinions, but is approached with the goal of understanding and finding a solution. Good conflict encourages open dialogue, empathy, humility, collaboration, and allows individuals and groups to address their differences and reach resolutions. It's, focused on problem solving and maintaining relationships rather than escalating the dispute.
Yeah, there's a way of kind of letting go of outcomes other than the maintenance of the relationship, right? High conflict is about, I need you to do something different. Good conflict is about, I want to understand you, and I'm hopeful that I can be able to help you understand me too.
Mm-hmm. This is just a quote I love from the book. We can get so mesmerized by high conflict that we don't realize we have somehow started fighting on the wrong side against our own cause. We can end up sacrificing what we most treasure.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, enough said.
Are there any mixed marriages here? Vikings and Packer fans? That's hard. That's hard, right? I mean, that's hard. And we can do this difference a little easier. Maybe they take it a little bit more serious in Wisconsin, but we can manage that a little bit. But managing differences in one relationship is really hard if we're not attuned to the goal of maintaining the relationship. If the goal is to convince, if the goal is to get my wife to be a Minnesota Vikings fan, I'm gonna push in ways that do more damage to our relationship because she doesn't care about football. So and I think there's something biblically about this too. Every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and every city or household divided against itself will not stand. In marriage, we're a house, right? In marriage, we're a house either together or divided, but we are community, right? We're community here in this community. We're community in the Twin Cities, right? We're community in this country, and we can see the fraying that happens when we don't recognize that there are differences. My job is not to convince and convert, but my job is to be in relationship and understand, right? My job is to honor that people may have a different framework for what's important to them, and that's not wrong, right?
I just had to throw it in one more time, Matt. I also just wanted to as we ending our time together today, just wanted to pause and say, we're going to continue next time to go in a little bit deeper, and we really would just want to wade in with you guys and talk more about practical skills to navigate polarization in relationships.
And next, so that's what we'll focus on next time, is go kind of deeper into how do we do this with our family, with our friends, with our community. There are some, that's what we'll work on. We've got time to spend a little bit kind of talking through some things about what we presented. We can go back to certain slides. Why don't you go back to the moral foundations one? I I wasn't sure how much time we'd have, so I didn't spend a lot of time on this. Think about that, fairness and cheating, think about friends or family that you have that kind of prioritize this above other things, right? Authority, people who, and there are ways that all of these can be exploited, but all of them are not bad, right? Having a chain of command in a family, having a chain of command in crisis is really important, and it can be exploited. So how do we walk in and understand what somebody's what's informing somebody's perspective, right? Yeah. Questions, reactions to what are you seeing in families, without getting into too much of the specific dynamics? But what are you seeing show up in families as we head into fall, or maybe as kids are coming home? What are you seeing and hearing as kids are coming home and with families this fall related to the political environment? Yeah, indifference. So kind of apathy, almost.
Like almost just so tired of it.
Yep.
They're just disengaging.
Yep.
17-year-olds.
Yeah. So, and that's a way. We talked about some of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, kind of stonewalling. This is too toxic. Defensiveness, criticism. That is toxic on my spirit. And so I'm just going to disengage. But disengaging leads to distance, right? So it doesn't lead to spending time in the pool of intimacy, right? So I'm seeing a lot of that too. Just I don't care. I'll vote. I don't know. But yeah. But that's part of what we want to address too. How do we help people come out of that apathy? How do we help kids be in it together so that isn't their only strategy? The only thing I can do is, Grandpa thinks one way, I think another. I just got to shut down. Or my school doesn't honor my way of thinking about things, so I'm just going to keep myself to myself. Right? That creates distance and division. And more othering too, right? Because if I can't be me here, I guess I'll just shut it down. But then maybe I'll find somebody over here that is, represents how I think. And so I'll distance from here and I'll cut off the body of Christ here and have community here and distance here, right? So yeah, that's something that we want to help young people to know how to navigate. Yeah. Other things. Great example. Yeah, go ahead.
I've noticed since school started, my kids are little. I have twin kindergartners, 5-year-olds, and my wife and I, we're pretty careful. We don't really discuss things around politics around them at all. They just don't understand. But just this past weekend, we were kind of doing like a family movie night, and my son and his sister he picked Home Alone 2, which it's good. It's a classic. But I didn't know this, but Donald Trump has a cameo in Home Alone 2.
That's right. He's walking through one of the park or something. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, great actor. The best. Yes, the best. Yeah. My 5-year-old son goes, Donald Trump, he's a bad guy. And I hit pause and I'm like, where did you hear that? He said, he's a dictator. He has no idea what that word means, right? Like no idea. He's a quiet kid, but I was like, they're getting this, since school started, this is on the kindergarten playground or whatever, they're having these discussions somewhere enough to where he saw a picture of him that's 20 years old, recognized him, and something that he heard was.
Yeah, we think that perhaps our younger kids are removed from some of the vitriol, and they're not. and they're not. And it's really hard because they're picking up these things. They're othering people without even knowing it, right? And it's their way of finding connection and belonging. So, these friends or that family thinks that, so I like them, so I must kind of, and so they're othering as a way to create belonging. And it doesn't allow them to sit in any gray. Yeah. Yep. What else do you see?
Kind of picking up of that a little bit, with similar age kiddo, our family system, most of our extended family members are on the other side that our immediate family is, and so we've mostly sort of avoided talking about it because I feel like at like developmental levels, it's hard. So kids that age are kind of all or nothing in certain ways, like sitting with the gray can be hard, but then at the same time, it feels like if they are having these conversations at school, I want to be engaging more intentionally, but it's hard to think about how to do that in ways that speak to what our family's values are without disparaging the people that she
Yeah.
loves,
Yep.
has deep relationships with, and deeply loved her.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's one of the pieces that I'm feeling conflicted and really mindful of how to
So
navigate.
how do we help contextualize the difference within our family, within our larger family, for our kids, so that it doesn't other these people that are so important to our kids? This is going to be one of the challenges here this fall, and frankly, probably for the next few years. How do we help them? There was an incident. My wife and my son we have a neighbor who thinks very differently, and is adamant about sharing how he thinks differently. And my wife, who is just so patient, walked away from that interaction. He was having a really hard time managing himself, and she finally invited him, if and when you want to hear my perspective, I'd be willing to share it. And she walked away, and she was crying a little because he was not very nice. And my son, just dismissed him as being old, which is othering, right? Which is not all that helpful. And it's so hard this is a real challenge. How do we help our kids avoid that? Because that just creates more distance. Now I get to dismiss him and his perspective because he was, for whatever reason, unable to hear my wife's perspective. That's not the body of Christ. Now it's still hurt, and there needs to be reconciliation if we're going to repair the relationship, which he did make a feeble effort at. I mean, I got to give him a little credit. He tried, but that is really hard stuff. Grandpa just sits around, watches this news or that news, and so what are you going to do? He's old. He's going to die. He won't be a voter for very much longer. That's not helpful. That's not body of Christ. Yeah. Yes, it dehumanizes. Yep, it does. And maybe that's the part we got to walk into them with. This is really hard because we don't want to suggest that because grandpa or grandma or uncle or aunt or whoever thinks this way, that they're bad or wrong or evil. We look at it so differently, and it's really hard to navigate this without giving that impression. Yeah, this is really hard. It requires a depth of humanity that I don't know if I'm ready for it, you guys. Right? This is hard stuff. It requires having us allow the ego to burn away every day in some way. Richard Rohr, anybody know Richard Rohr, Franciscan monk, Franciscan priest? I heard, anybody know who Pete Holmes is? Do you know who Pete Holmes is? He's a comedian. He does a podcast. What is his podcast? You made it weird. I think that's what it is. Anyway, Richard Rohr was on his podcast, and I kind of like Richard Rohr, so I was like, okay, I'll check out this podcast. And one of the things that Richard Rohr shared that he does every day is he prays for humiliation. And he says it's a really powerful prayer because it keeps him humble, right? Humiliation is about burning the ego away. And our egos are embedded in all of this, especially when we get hooked, like Alexis was talking about. You know, I'm right. You know, my value of care or sanctity or authority is way more important than how you're looking at this, and you see it wrong. That's ego. And so this political season actually gives us an opportunity to sit in maybe prayers for humility or humiliation, so that we can walk into it with grace and letting some of that go. I look at it this way, you look at it that way. It's so different. It's so confusing for me. I don't think I even have access to those taste buds. You know, and helping our kids understand that too, because that dismissal, you know, well, he just, you know, thinks this way, he's kind of stupid. That is not helpful, and that is not about the body of Christ. Yeah, good. What else are you seeing show up? How is this showing up at college campus at Normandale? Courtney, how are you seeing, you know, the kind of polarized dynamic show up on campus? Are you seeing anything that people are pulling and conflict around this on campus at all?
I haven't really. I mean, there's clubs for different, like, people think this and people think that, but I'm not really in them, so I just see the posters in the mall.
Sure, yeah. How about, what are you seeing that is creating bridges in communities? What are you seeing that's creating bridges? I think about, Courtney, some of what I see out there is people with a desire with those different clubs, like finding ways to do things together, to be able to create space to share and listen. What are you seeing that is offering opportunities to bridge some of that divide? Braver Angels. Yeah, say more about Braver Angels.
It's a nonprofit organization founded by Bill Doherty, who's a married family therapist, professor at the U of M. I don't know if he's retired, I don't know, but he and another couple of folks were seeing, you know, back actually, I think it was at least one, if not two election cycles ago, that this conflict was just tearing communities and families apart. And so he brought his skill set from helping couples navigate high conflict marriages, and then applying it to teaching in different contexts across communities, how to navigate these conversations and
Yeah.
and instead of feeling like you have to get someone to agree or see it how you see it, how do you still engage respectfully across communities?
We'll highlight some of what Braver Angels has been doing when we get into more of the kind of tangible hands and, you know, nuts and bolts next week. One of the things that I so appreciate Doherty and his colleagues, they started these town halls like 12, 16 years ago, bringing reds and blues together with the goal of understanding, and it's become workshops, conferences where people go and deal with specific issues and also practice some of the skills of being in it together. Yeah, it's a great resource, you know, designed to help mend our country. Yeah, and find ways. So think about that moral framework theory and the taste buds there. If we begin to divide and operate in a way that we don't have access with relationship, we don't have access to those other tastes.
Yeah.
Tastes.
Sure.
We're missing out. We're missing out on a bigger spectrum of what life and community and, you know, learning is, right? And that's part of what I appreciate about Doherty and his colleagues, their work, Braver Angels. That the terminology came from the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln, he called, as he was asking the country to heal, he talked about calling forth our better angels, right? So we could heal the division. And that's been Doherty and that the Braver Angels movement. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But that's a resource, and there's trainings and lectures that are online that people have access to.
I believe some of them they're free too. So yeah, there's specific ones that you can look at, and we will draw from some of that work. But there's even just a deeper dive too, if you're wanting to like learn more and find different ways to engage in conversation with people.
So we talked about structure reduces anxiety. So, you know, maybe with your family, you set up Braver Angels nights, and we're going to learn the skills to be together, you guys, and you know, practice the skills with each other. Yeah. What else are you seeing? Where are you seeing other attempts to bridge the divide? In schools, are there things your kids are seeing that are helping them? I'm not probing. I suspect there's some things out there. I know on college campuses there are some intentional attempts to bring people together, because it can be so volatile with idealistic young people who are still sort of moving from black and white thinking, and the siloing and the other and the sorting that they've done has made it so difficult, because my identity is so connected to what I believe. Right? And so finding ways to help young people move in that, the complexity of their identity and belonging, and be able to operate with people who have different ways of looking at it. So, other things you're seeing. What are you walking away with tonight? What are you walking away wrestling with from our time together? Was there a little Mr. Saucedo in 10th grade Spanish class at Southwest High School would always catch me talking in the corner, not in Spanish. Mr. Meyers, you must have some pearl of wisdom to share with the class, because otherwise you'd be engaged in what we're doing. And I was probably making fart jokes or something, I don't know. But I love that pearl of wisdom, right? The pearl. A pearl is, I don't know my biology all that much, but what I understand is a little piece of sand. Piece of sand? Grain of sand gets in a clam. Does that sound right? Oyster? We'll go with oyster. And it irritates the oyster, and the secretions from the oyster are what begin to build that little pearl. Right? It's the irritation that creates that beautiful pearl, right? So maybe you don't have a fully formed pearl yet, but what's something you're walking away with tonight from our conversation?
I think that there's such a fear to talk about these things.
Yeah.
So I'm here like as an educator, a high school educator, but also as a parent of two young adults, 17 and 20. And in both realms of my world, I have fear. There's fear to talk about it. So even in an educational setting, it's like we don't talk about it because then it keeps the peace. So
Yeah.
just don't talk about it. We
Yeah.
that comes.
Yep.
And so we are definitely a house divided. I have cancel culture in my house, and I have national Christianism in my house. So it's how do I navigate those? And so part of me is the fear
Yeah.
of like, how do I do those things and do it well to maintain
Yeah.
relationship?
So that resonated. That fear has made it really hard. I've the only way I've figured out is to kind of shut down and cut off part of how I enter. I'm not going to enter into this. Yeah, and so that coming up for you tonight, that fear really drives me to avoid. And part of what I think we were working with tonight too is how do we name that? And enter into the humility and humanity of that. Guys, this is really hard stuff to think about and talk about because we think about it so differently. What I know is I love you and I value your perspective, and I know that my perspective is different, and I don't know how to talk about that with you. And I want to, because you matter to me, but I also don't want to do harm to our relationship. So that's recognizing that fear is operating and perhaps naming the fear and starting to talk about that and the kind of the bigger picture goals. The bigger picture goal for me is understanding and maintaining a really good relationship, right? In doing that, you're putting the lifeguard at the edge of the pool, and it might be that you only stick your legs in the water, and that might be a start. Yeah. So how pervasive and difficult fear is in driving us related to this. Yeah. Other takeaways, other things that you're walking away from our time together.
Tim's comment about his 5-year-old coming home and saying that during the movie just made me think how much we as parents, because that child probably got the message from his house, like from an adult, especially adult in his house. How much our kids are listening
Yeah.
and absorbing what we think and say and do.
Yes.
Scares me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That we're that they're absorbing cancel culture and all these things. They're absorbing them, and we're trying to shield them. And so I think it is part of our call is how do we start talking about this with them when they're young, kind of like you did. Pause the movie. Help me understand. Where did you get this? What did you learn about this? And then help them process in developmentally appropriate places.
I think what I'm thinking too is, so that particular, I don't know where he got that from, but I am suspicious that he spends a lot of time at his grandparents' house and on both sides, and they are very passionate about their politics. And I'm thinking, like, okay, we need to have a discussion with grandma and grandpa and people that adults they spend time with about like what we feel is appropriate to talk about around that or not. I don't think that the filter is always there with other adults that are in their life at all. I mean,
Yeah.
and
And
even if it's not them talking about it, a news station is on a lot, and stuff that we probably
Yep.
wouldn't have on it is
Yep.
probably on in the background.
I think for me, one of the things that I do for my kids is I when there's media that's coming into our house, whether it's newspapers or broadcast news or whatever it is, I'm helping them to see that there is a particular perspective that this journalist or this outlet emphasizes, and that it may be missing others. So I'm helping them see that there's this is not the truth. This is a truth for this, perspective, but there's ample perspectives. You know, we watch Fox, we watch MSNBC, you know, and I have our kids are older. I wouldn't do that with 5-year-olds, but I have our kids watch these different outlets. What are you taking away? What's the important piece underneath this for them, for this perspective, right? And then being conscientious about my language that could be othering, right? Especially with little kids. Yeah.
The other thing that I want them to understand is, so there's like the vilification of the one side, but then there's almost like the sainthood of your chosen person, right?
Yeah.
And I want them to understand, even though they're small, that like, you're not going to agree with everything that this person does, that this person isn't going to be perfect, that they are going to let you down at some point, and so I want to be conscious of not, and it's just a different form of othering almost, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
This person is higher than we are.
Yeah.
And lifting them up to expectations that are
Yeah.
not possibly achievable.
So helping them really embrace the humanity of all of these people and positions. Yeah, and being conscientious, because if you set somebody up on a pedestal, the fall is really hard when you realize they're human. And it may swing us, you know, in terms of being really disillusioned about this thing or that thing, and that's really hard on, you know, our identity. And yeah, good. Other reflections, takeaways from our conversation tonight. It's good to be in it with you. We'll be back next week. We've got a few things that we're doing. We do a parent leadership series. We have 4 kind of workshops in-house at our office, which is just down at 394 and 100. The one coming up in a couple of weeks is on leading children in technology. How do we lead kids to healthy, responsible technology use? This is something we've done a lot of work with families around. So if that was something that you would find useful, certainly you're welcome to join us and get the information. We have got a brochure back there. But we're excited to be with you and continue this conversation. I think it's really an important one. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Nicole, you want to close this out?
Sure.
Anything?